So the third of the big losses the Supreme Court handed Donald Trump today was one that was not exactly a ruling against him, but a decision to not even take up one of his pet cases. The Supreme Court declined to hear Donald Trump's appeal of the $5 million awarded to E. Jean Carroll after a jury in 2023 found Donald Trump was liable for sexually abusing her and defaming E. Jean Carroll. Let's bring in senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, political analyst Kim Atkins-Storr is here. Kim, of the three defeats, I imagine this is the one that's going to have him rage posting all night long.
I'm sure it does. There is nothing that seems to evoke his ire than the not one but two jury verdicts against him in cases brought by E. Jean Carroll. And as you pointed out, in this case, the Supreme Court declined to step in and take up an appeal that he made to a $5 million award. This was a defamation case. And what his attorneys were arguing was that the case should be thrown out. The verdict should be thrown out because the court heard evidence that should have been inadmissible, things like evidence of his statements, his Access Hollywood statements and claims by other women of sexual assault. Essentially, the courts below held that, listen, even if those were impermissible, there was a host of other evidence in this case that fully supported the jury's verdict. And the Supreme Court, as is usual with cases like this, decided not to even touch it.
Kim, what is your sense of what we got today from the Supreme Court?
I think overall, despite the fact that, as you pointed out, there were some defeats issued to Trump, but I think the gravity of his win really dramatically overshadows it. I mean, it's hard to overstate what the Slaughter decision does in expanding the power of the executive beyond all bounds that we have seen in the 250 years of this nation's history. It's basically saying the executive branch works at the beck and call of the president, and he can impose loyalty tests on everyone who works beneath him, including the experts at agencies whose job it is to keep drugs safe, whose job it is to ensure that there are not unfair trade practices or unsafe working conditions, or that the crib you put your baby in is safe. All of these people can be hired based on their loyalty to a president as opposed to their duty to the American people. And even worse, the Supreme Court overturned a 90-year-old precedent in doing so. So we can't even rely on precedent of the Supreme Court anymore. I think the Supreme Court, in a way, expanded its own power, but in another way, just really, really did further damage to its own reputation.
Justice Sotomayor is sort of speaking for millions of Americans in her dissents. What did you make of John Roberts not even being able to meet her gaze?
I wasn't surprised when I saw that reporting. I wasn't in the courtroom, but I was not surprised when I saw that reporting. I think one thing we are increasingly seeing, which is really problematic in my view about this court, is not only the disdain that members of the conservative supermajority have shown to precedent, to constitutional interpretation, to history, to all of it, but also the growing comfortableness that the justices are at showing disdain for their colleagues in the minority. You had last week Alito snapping at Justice Sonia Sotomayor on the bench, and today Roberts not even being able to meet her gaze. I find that so disrespectful. I wouldn't treat my most annoying coworker that way, let alone being a justice on the bench and doing that. I think to me it just shows the disdain that some members of the majority have for even their own colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this about MAGA voters. They're terrible winners. You know, Tom Massey made this point, like, we won everything. What's wrong with that? It extends to the court. Like, they're in the supermajority. Like, they get to do whatever. And they're, like, awful, awful winners. They win everything. They control the court, and they're miserable about it, it would seem, from what's reported again.